Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jimena Franca Jenkins, a senior research scientist and co-director with NERN. I'm really glad you could join us today as we dig into what we have learned about implementing high-quality instructional materials in middle grades math. Thanks, Stephen. This session is hosted by the National Implementation Research Network, and I'm excited to be joined by colleagues from TNTP and Guilford County Schools in North Carolina. We're here to share some practical insights and recommendations that can help districts and educators accelerate student learning, and we appreciate you making time for this conversation. Just a quick note on logistics. If you could please have any questions that you might have, if you can please send those questions to Stephanie Kennedy. Seems like our Q&A function is not working. So if you can send them to her, we'll address them at the end of the presentation. We're gonna do our best to answer as many as we can toward the end. So the chat is off for participants, but our host may share links and resources there. Don't worry, a recording will be sent out after the event. So here's our roadmap. I will start with an overview of EIC, and then we'll dig into some of our findings and hear stories from the field, from our partners, share recommendations, and wrap up with a Q&A. So I encourage you to jot down any questions as we go along, as we're going to try to answer most of them. Okay, so the Effective Implementation Cohort, or EIC, is all about building district capacity to implement high-quality middle years math curricula as part of a coherent instructional system to accelerate learning for students. So our team's role is to support partnerships between providers and local education agencies with help with implementation and measurement, and collect and analyze data to answer the pressing learning questions that we set up in our learning agenda or EIC learning agenda, which I believe they're going to be adding the link to the chat, so you will have access to that. So our purpose is clear. We want to help districts implement a high-quality grade math curriculum that accelerates learning for students experiencing poverty, Black, Latino, Latina, and English learners designated students. We also committed to sharing what we learn, what districts need for effective implementation, the aspects of the implementation at the district and school level that works best for these priority students, and what it really takes to make site-wide implementation successful. Our theory of action is centered in if together with providers we help districts build capacity and coherence at the district and school level, then teachers will be better equipped to use high-quality instructional materials, and that leads to better student experiences and outcomes. So in this case, for this particular project, NERN supported providers, NERN and providers supported districts, districts together with leadership and coaches supported teachers, and teachers supported students. So we have different levels of support throughout the whole cascade in order to conduct this work. So what did we actually find? I'm going to walk you through the highlights, really the highlights, because we can spend the whole day talking about the different findings that we have. What worked, what surprises, and where we still have work to do. We measure several student outcomes, such as math engagement, math enjoyment, growth mindset, self-efficacy, and achievement. We wanted to look beyond just the test scores and achievement, but really try to understand how the students were experiencing math. So here's what stood out regarding our math beliefs and experiences as it relates to the demographic findings. We found female students reported more engagement, while male students reported more enjoyment and self-efficacy. Growth mindset was very similar across all of our groups of students. And when it came to enjoyment and looking at the demographics, Black and Hispanic students reported more enjoyment, while the white students reported more engagement, self-efficacy, and growth mindset. When students felt their teachers respected their cultures, they reported higher engagement, enjoyment, self-efficacy, and growth mindset. An interesting finding was that when teachers used more culturally relevant examples, students were reporting more engagement and self-efficacy, but less enjoyment and growth mindset. Now, we found this to be a nuance in the data, and it's something that we are continuing to try to unpack that really, we believe, warrants additional exploration, such as, focus groups, listening sessions with students. Unfortunately, we're done collecting the data for this project, but that doesn't mean that this is not an area that we really need to continue to explore to better understand what is happening. So with regards to achievement, within the EIC, we had a subsample. I mean, and I don't think I have said how many participants, but we had 19 school districts in total and 10 providers. So we had a total of 19 diets. But we had a subsample within the EAC participants that consisted of 3 districts for which we were able to directly link data from the student survey to their achievement findings. Within that sample, we found that achievement was lower for our Hispanic students who perceived their teachers to use more examples that were reflective of the student culture. Now, this is a clear call to action for us to strengthen the supports and address inequities within our educational system. We also looked at teacher outcomes related to feasibility, acceptability, and the appropriateness of the curricula and the teacher practices, and the self-efficacy in both math instruction and cultural pedagogy. Understanding the teachers' experiences as they work on their daily basis with the students, it was key to support them and ultimately for them to support the students. One of our big takeaways, when teachers reported that they were confident in their math instruction, and when they find the curriculum acceptable, that combination predicted better student outcomes. This really suggests that the self-efficacy and the implementation factors work together to drive results. We also found that teachers' ratings of curriculum acceptability predicted higher achievement for students who identify as Hispanic, white, Asian, or another race, but not for our Black students. The effect of teacher factors differ by student group, which highlights the need to dig deeper into how we support all of our students and not just a specific group of students. As I said, this is just a snippet of some of the findings that we find on EIC. We invite you to look at the report so that you can not only access some of the these findings and review these findings, but also look at some of the additional findings that we have. And later, we'll talk a little bit more about what were some of the recommendations that came out of the report, which you could also find in the report as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to Jimmy, from Guilford County, who is going to be sharing with us some of their learnings.
Great, thanks, Jimena. As Jimena said, I'm Jimmy Leek. I am the Director of Accountability Research and Evaluation for Guilford County Schools. So just a little bit about Guilford County Schools. We are in Greensboro and High Point, North Carolina, in the middle of the state. We're the 3rd largest school district in North Carolina, behind Wake and Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and have about 67,000 students and 120 schools. For the EIC project, we were working with 24 middle schools. So that was and there was about 15,000 students that we were looking at. So next one. So I worked with Emily, who's going to talk after me, who's our director of math, but really across the district with a number of different leaders since the beginning of the EIC project in 21-22. And this is showing our district capacity assessment data over the course of the last 4 years. So as the other districts did in the EIC project, did a district capacity assessment each of the 3 years during the EIC grant, but we also continued to do that last year, and Yolanda came and did that with us in 24-25 school year, and we're planning on doing another one this year. So the district capacity assessment is really just looking at how we're doing as a district on different measures. You can see leadership, fidelity, selection, training, coaching. How are we supporting our math implementation at the middle school level? And as you can see, we saw gains over the course of the 4 years. There's different items that make up the domains here. So things like how are we supporting coaching of teachers in the district? How are we building out data systems to track progress of students and teachers? How are we ensuring fidelity and integrity of curriculum? Those kind of things. So it was really important, and it continues to be really important for us to come together as a leadership team. I serve on the team, and Emily does, but it's not just math and data. It's also people from our exceptional children or students with disabilities department, English language learners, principal supervisors, sort of a cross-cutting leadership across the district to make sure that we are inclusive of all sort of the different domains and programs and areas within the district. So this graph shows a little bit about our continued improvements in math. So as we all know, we're sort of benchmarking ourselves, or a lot of districts have benchmarked themselves against the 2018-19 data that were pre-pandemic. And when we look at our data in math at the end of grade assessments that are the state assessments in grades 3 through 8, we continue to see better growth than the state. So this is a little bit confusing, but the way to look at this is, for example, for the top set of bars, the state is still 1.9 percentage points behind where they were in 2018-19, but we're only 1.2 percentage points in math behind where we were. So we're doing a little bit better than them. We're getting back to that zero line, which is where we were pre-pandemic. And as you can see, for Black students who are economically disadvantaged, and students with disabilities, we're actually doing better and have sort of fully recovered and are surpassing where we were pre-pandemic. So we continue to see growth each and every year. And I'll pass it to Emily.
Hi, everyone. As Jimmy said, I am Emily here. I'm the Pre-K-12 Director of Math for Guilford County Schools. And thankful for the collaboration with our research department through Jimmy and his team. However, we wanted to really also celebrate the use of our high quality instructional materials. So what you're seeing is a dashboard that was created through this process to kind of track our implementation data over time. And so you're seeing an example of the blue, green, yellow, orange situation. Those are our rubric for how we're tracking our different indicators for our implementation. I think what's really interesting from this is there's that chart in the middle that talks about how many of our classroom observations over time are using curriculum. And right now is showing, that's really tiny on my screen, but I think if I'm going from memory, it's about 9% of our classrooms were using something other than the HQIM, which, I mean, sometimes that's called for, right? So like you're always going to see some sort of percentage there. And that's actually down from, it was like 15 to 20% when we started this process. But that's not just the only thing that we're seeing. We're also seeing the ways in which it's being used. So not only are we using it more, but the ways that we are using it matches more of the intent of the curriculum that we have selected. And so while that's kind of like a small difference, at the same time, I just want to point out that it's doing two things. It's helping us actually use the curriculum more and meet it to the intention is and the purpose of what we were doing. On the next slide, this is there. It's the screenshot of the app that we now use, again, created through this project. And when this project started, middle math was the only thing that was there, right? Because that was the only thing systematically that we were tracking for implementation data. But as you can see now, this app has grown quite a bit since 21, 22 when we started the EIC project. And we're now tracking this data for K-12 math and literacy because we have HQIM in all of those spots. There's actually other things that people are doing. The EC department or our student with disabilities department are doing similar things, but this gives you a picture of how just in math and literacy, the project has grown quite a bit in Guilford County Schools, and we've learned so much from the time that we had together in that grant.
All right, so I am going to kind of move us into some of the district outcomes that we saw cohort-wide because we just heard a really wonderful example from one of our districts, Guilford. And I'm Megan Bookout. I'm a research scientist at NERN. And as we talk about these district outcomes, we're going to be focusing on district capacity for implementation, which Jimmy just gave us a really great overview of what that looked like in terms of growth that they saw in Guilford. We're also going to be looking at how the district implementation teams were functioning overall, and also what were the school leaders within the district saying about their perception of their own leadership within the implementation. So that includes their perceptions of their curricula and also some of their thoughts about things like how much they stuck to the implementation and also things like how much they knew about the curriculum and the implementation as well. So, linking first of all, the district factors that we have to the teacher factors that we were just talking about. What did we see for districts who had higher capacity for implementation? So, again, that was the measure Jimmy just walked over. They were the ones that were kind of doing all these things that they needed to build out their capacity for implementation. Well, in the final year of implementation overall, we saw some really positive outcomes. So, the districts that had a higher capacity for implementation also had teachers who rated their curricula to be more appropriate for their students, and the teachers were reporting higher self-efficacy or confidence in their own math instruction and abilities. So that was really good overall. We also had some findings for what happened with the teachers when the principals, the school leaders, were saying they had a greater kind of ability to lead the implementation as well. And here the findings were a little bit more mixed. So similarly, we saw that the school leaders, when they were rating the implementation and their own leadership really strongly, that the teachers were reporting that the curricula was more appropriate for students too. However, we saw that the teachers were rating the curriculum as less feasible to implement. They were also reporting some lower scores for self-efficacy for cultural pedagogy. So those were some interesting findings that we didn't have a lot more information to disentangle, but I think really speaks to the importance of understanding school leadership within the context of an implementation and how does kind of that interaction from the district to the principal to the teachers really play a role in what we're seeing in the teacher outcomes too. We also looked at how do strategies for implementation relate to building out these district implementation outcomes and factors that we're seeing here. So within our 19 districts and their provider partners, every dyad had their own unique set of implementation strategies, which were grouped within these 7 clusters of kind of thematically related strategies. So some examples of these, in case they're kind of hard to read on the side there, are things like providing implementation supports like coaching or tools or resources, or engaging those who receive the program, like students or families, or building an infrastructure, such as creating new roles or allocating resources to implementation. So if this is something you're really interested in, there's some more information in a report that you can use that QR code in the corner to find, and also the link is being dropped in the chat as well. So when we looked at each of those different clusters on its own, we found that each cluster of strategies was really generally highly related with all of our district implementation factors. So capacity for implementation, teaming, and school leadership. We also looked at all those different clusters together to see if any one of those strategy groups had an impact above and beyond the other strategy groups for each of our outcomes. And so if you look at those yellow and blue boxes, that's what we found there. So cultivating relationships, so really putting the time and effort into building champions and teams and leaders resulted in higher district teaming scores, which probably makes sense. If you're putting effort into building your team is going to be kind of having a higher team functioning. We also found similarly that the cultivating relationships and strategies for integrating data into the implementation. So that's developing structures for collecting data, having ways to report data back resulted in greater school leadership for implementation. So again, kind of building out those relationships and those champions and also having a way to communicate about the data that you're seeing meant that the principals in those districts were reporting that their leadership was stronger for implementation as well. And then lastly, we looked as well at what we were seeing in terms of change across the 3 years of implementation for our district outcomes. And we found that throughout the cohort on average, district capacity significantly grew. So that was a really good thing to see that over time that we were really kind of building out and seeing that our LEAs were able to kind of improve their capacity for implementation across years. And even though we didn't necessarily see that the district teaming scores on average throughout the whole cohort were growing across the 3 years, we did see that for districts that had greater growth in district teaming scores, so they were going up, those districts were also showing greater growth in district average teachers' self-efficacy for math instruction. So their teachers were reporting greater average competence across years as well, which was really nice to see. And so now I'm going to be turning it over to our friends at TNTP to talk a little bit more about some of the work that they were doing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Shaw, and I am a director here at TNTP, alongside my colleagues, Ryan, Kappa, and Jency. And so I just want to kind of share a little bit very quickly, like TNTP, we are a national nonprofit, and we have our hand in like 3 specific areas. We have a division that focuses on research and publications, for which one of our more well-known publications is the Opportunity Myth. And recently, the follow-up to that report is the Opportunity Makers. We also have a division that focuses on policy work. And our largest division is really the consulting division that is providing technical services for districts, schools, and state ed departments. And more often than not, that work is focused on HQIM implementation. So for the EIC, we specifically worked with Buffalo Public School District in New York and the Pasadena Unified School District in California. So with that, I'm going to kind of share a little bit about what we've worked on. And one of the big highlights out of our work with Buffalo and Pasadena was our work with focus groups, specifically with student and caregiver focus groups. And part of this did come out of that district capacity assessment. We noticed like that was a place where generally engagement with students and caregivers was commonly one that just fell flat. And so at the surface level, the focus groups were utilized to track progress towards overall goals and implementation. But the main purpose for conducting the focus groups was about developing those deeper community stakeholder engagement. And so we targeted specifically those groups that we felt were whose input tends to be left out of the conversation when it comes to implementation. So when we worked with our students and caregiver focus groups, we were really seeking to understand how implementation efforts were affecting their day-to-day and what supports or actions might be necessary to improve their experience to support the overall implementation efforts. So by incorporating student and caregiver perception and feedback into the overall data analysis alongside the quantitative data that we got from teachers and leaders through surveys, as well as those classroom observations, we, as the technical service provider, were able to help our districts in creating action plans that were based on all levels of feedback, especially incorporating that input from those stakeholders who are commonly left out. And while they're the ones who are commonly left out, they're actually the ones who are most impacted by implementation efforts. And so with that, Ryan's going to talk to you a little bit about the actual like makeup of our focus groups and some of the findings. And Ryan was one of the most integral parts of this work. So I'm happy to hand it over to him.
By integral, Amy means I'm just the one who got to speak to most of the kids all the time, which is by far the best part. But yeah, let me share a little bit about all the focus groups we did. Over 3 years, we had a chance to host over 60 focus groups between Buffalo and Pasadena. and between the students and caregivers. It started out in year one in Pasadena in the spring semester, based on just like a bubbling idea our team had on like how do we integrate student voices more than just a survey 2 times a year, and what might they say in person to us versus just on a survey. So we got a chance to talk to 45 students across the 6 schools, and we had a chance to talk to 13 caregivers who were a little consistently tougher to find times to speak to. And we eventually integrated surveys to caregivers too, so that we could hear their feedback. But each year we refined our approach to getting students and caregivers to participate. And so you can see in year 2 in Pasadena, we had a pretty big jump between numbers where we talked to almost 170 plus kids over the year in the fall, winter, and spring. We saw our caregiver numbers bump up, and our first 2 focus groups in Buffalo, 2 of the schools. And now I have to talk over my dog barking in the background, so I hope you're all not hearing that. And then in year 3, we actually transitioned in Pasadena to speaking to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, to just following a group of 8th grade students throughout the year who had participated in the cohort since the very beginning. So we tallied and spoke to 130 students over the course of the year. And then one of the positives that we left the districts with after our 3 years of participation was just some knowledge and skills in how to continue hosting focus groups when we left. And so in year 4, the Pasadena team was that the caregiver turnout was the highest, which is great. Let me share a little bit about our findings. So what we heard consistently across what students shared with us was primarily a desire for opportunities to make real-world connections between math activities, learning, what they were doing in their classrooms, and how that might be useful when they transition middle school into high school and into careers and what we heard a lot from the 8th graders that we spoke to in the final year was an expressed desire and need for more project-based learning and a chance to collaborate with their classmates beyond just speaking on one-off turn-in talks or groupthink at the beginning of a lesson. They wanted time to actually talk math with their peers. Only half of students felt confident in their ability to remember learnings throughout the year. So they would remember a topic, but they would often forget how they were supposed to solve a problem, what their teacher had taught them, how they could carry that over. And then one positive finding we heard consistently across the 3 years was that their teachers cared about them as from caregivers who we didn't hear primarily as much from, and I apologize for my dog if she's just rattling. She has not stopped barking the entire time I've been talking. But they wanted more communication from districts and teachers specifically, and we heard this across the years. They wanted to know more about their child's progress in class, what was happening, how they were doing on assignments, what they needed to work on, what they could do at home to provide additional supports. And then many of them explained that coming off of COVID and all of the learning loss that occurred, that they were spending a lot of time providing additional supports at home or had their child work with tutors to catch up. And so these were things that we heard consistently in both sites across 3 years, and really worked with the district to hone in on strategies for solving some of these issues. For larger takeaways and process reflections around focus groups and learnings, I'm turning it over to my colleague, Jency.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shansi Knichirel. I'm a director at TNTP, and I was supporting Pasadena Unified. Just a few process reflections. If you are considering or in the process of building out focus groups at your site, you want to really be mindful of how you're building trust across everyone who is going to be involved in those focus groups. So that involves obviously caregivers or students, but with students, oftentimes we had a school, liaison who students are familiar with, who would often be in the space to support with translations if we were working with multilingual learners. just anything that would come up that is more school related that liaison could give additional context for. We also were intentional around making sure that caregivers and students understood the why behind what we were trying to learn from them and what we were going to do with that information once we had it. And we were also aware of how to incentivize participation overall. And so for students, we would provide snacks, we would provide oftentimes time away from a class they didn't necessarily want to be in. They felt special in that space. And with our 8th grade cohort, we emphasized that their insights would inform what was happening across 8th grades across Pasadena, all 6 middle schools. And so that was very important to surface. Additionally, when we're thinking about psychological safety, we were mindful of things like translated materials and interpretation services, and making sure that students and caregivers could respond in their language of choice. And so those are considerations that we absolutely want to put in front of this group, in addition to building out norms alongside students and caregivers as well. So we would come with prepared norms and ask them what else they would want to add and ensure was true of the space and time that we were together. And then for students in particular, we were mindful that we needed a balance of independent think time, time to write on anchor charts, for example, time to interpret the data across students. So really slowing down the process and making sure that there are multiple points and ways to engage in the conversation other than verbally, because we know that can be stressful and challenging for the students that we are working with. And then finally, we want to leave time for analysis. I'm sure across all systems, we're gathering tons and tons of data, sometimes too much data, and we never really have a chance to sit down and understand what the data are telling us. And so making sure as you're developing out fleshing out your focus group plan, making sure that you're building in adequate time and space to analyze what the data say. It is time consuming. Our good friend Ryan over there will tell you that understanding qualitative data takes a little bit more time and is a little bit more complex than when you're looking at survey data. So it's an important part of the process of refining your implementation plan and identifying the right small tweaks based on the data. So definitely consider that as you're planning out your initiatives. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about overarching takeaways from the focus groups. We administered surveys to both caregivers and students throughout our time in the EIC, and we use those surveys to uncover what else we wanted to learn. So those conversations gave us additional data around the questions that came up with the survey data. So using both surveys and focus groups would be something that we'd absolutely encourage you to do. Secondly, students and caregivers are experts in their own experiences, meaning that they know they have unique experiences, and it is a mistake to perceive all caregivers or all students as needing the same supports or having the same experiences. And so we consistently saw that across distinct groups of participants, whether they be at students at particular school, one school or another, or caregivers who have students who attend multiple schools within the district. So really getting underneath all the unique characteristics of the students who are participating as well as the caregivers will really give deepen the insights that you have and that you use to adjust your implementation strategies overall. And not surprisingly, oftentimes the insights from caregivers and students echoed or underscored what we were seeing in learning walk data, what we were seeing in teacher feedback, what we were seeing in achievement data. So it was just another proof point that helped us identify what we need to do next more confidently and more leading to more effective implementation overall. And then finally, I had mentioned on the previous slide that sharing the purpose and the why behind what we're trying to learn through these focus groups is important. And just as important is reporting back what was learned and what schools are going to do. So whether that's in a newsletter, in a flyer, in a follow-up presentation, you can't communicate enough about what you're learning and what you're doing. But the key thing to remember is don't keep it a secret, because as you're building trust across those communications and letting folks know that their investment of time, their vulnerability and sharing resulted in concrete actions that are improving experiences for kids. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you, Jency. My name is Yolanda Perkins. I'm an implementation specialist with NERN. I've had the honor of working with Guilford County as part of the effective implementation cohort, as well as a TNTP as they partner with 2 districts in the cohort as well. And I'm going to give you just a brief overview of some of our key takeaways and recommendations from the effective implementation cohort. You'll see as we go through that for more details, you can access the full report using the QR code that'll be on the top of the slide. So I'll start with a few of those key takeaways. So one thing that you see we have noted here is integrate implementation readiness. What we found is that effective curriculum implementation begins by assessing and building readiness at every level. That's at the district level, the school level, and as well as the classroom level. And making sure that these teams are prepared for change is very important to ensure that we can sustain the work that's being done. You'll also see we have noted here about assessing fit and feasibility. Fit and feasibility matter. So making sure that the curriculum that's selected fits the district's context and needs is very important. This means you need to involve leaders, staff, families, and students in the adoption process to ensure usability and impact of that curriculum. And then our final 2 bullets on there are about comprehensive support. What we want to lift up is that there's a need to use multi-level tailored implementation plans, which we use as part of the effective implementation cohort. Combine coaching, professional learning, and leadership engagement to make sure that make sure that support is there for educators and to drive success of the work. And let's go on to our next one. So on this slide, you will see that we have highlighted there the investment in data-driven improvement. And we heard that today from Guilford County as they shared information about the app that they used and how they used their district capacity data to be able to move implementation forward. And we've also heard that from TNTP as they talked about feedback loops, as they learned from the different the groups that they put together, their student groups as well as their family groups. And so collect actionable data for this and be able to prioritize those leading indicators and use those feedback loops for continuous improvement. Also, we heard today about the importance of elevating the voice of critical perspectives. Make sure that we're centering the voices of students and families and staff in implementation work. And we need to engage the beneficiaries. Really look at those students because those are the ones that are benefiting from should be benefiting from the implementation work. And use what we learn from our students, use what we learn from our teachers in shaping implementation and ensure that our decision-making protocol focuses on equity and relevance. And then Think about sustainability. Make sure that we're embedding sustainability strategies early. So thinking about those strategies that Megan shared today include thinking about having transition plans and ongoing resource identification to ensure that there's a long-term impact. And finally, making sure that we advance knowledge and partnership. One of the great things that that we were able to do within the effective implementation cohort is that we brought together districts, we brought together educational provider partners, and we brought together NERN as an implementation science partner to be able to bridge research and practice together. And being able to do that helps to support adaptation and improvement within implementation. So with all of that, I just want to say that successful curriculum implementation requires readiness, fit, comprehensive support, data-driven improvement, critical perspectives engagement, sustainability planning, and expert partnership. And all these elements together work to create effective, equitable, and lasting change. So with that, I'm going to wrap up our discussion today and turn it over to my colleague Stephanie Kennedy to be able to open up our time for question and answers.
All right. Thank you, Yolanda, and thank you to all of our presenters. We are still open for questions. If folks would like to add those in the chat, you can send those directly to me. Oops, I'm sorry. Did not realize I had my video off. Hello. We have a couple of questions here for folks, and we are going to start with one for Guilford. We have a question: how did you find time to collect the implementation data? That should be an easy question to answer. Guilford, what do we think? How did you find time to collect the implementation data?
Yeah, so really that was a part of the systems work that we did with our provider for this project, which was CORE. And so a lot of that planning was around what are the systems and the structures that we're putting in place to make this happen. To be clear, we as district representatives we are not the one who is capturing all those observations. That's not the goal of that. The goal is to build the school level and building leadership capacity. And so we do that 3 times a year, but it's only like maybe an average of 6 classrooms for those 3 cycles. And that purpose, we still do that now. And it's been 2 years since the project. And the purpose of that is to continue our norming and our messaging. So Jimmy, the director of research, can now talk math instruction just as well as I can, just as well as the principal supervisors who are supervising principals around implementation can. The school leaders are the ones who are getting that full measure of implementation. And we recommend 2 per teacher per cycle of work. And we do 3 cycles in a year because we want to not zoom in on one teacher, but get a full picture of where implementation is at our school level. Jimmy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I'd just add on the time piece, teacher or school-based coaches, we call them curriculum facilitators or multi-classroom leaders, and then assistant principals and principals are supposed to be observing classrooms anyway during the school year. And so when we were working with CORE originally, they had brought an app to us to help collect the data. That app was something that wasn't within our system, and we weren't going to be able to afford long term. But people really liked it, and so we have some good people in our data analytics department, and they were able to create a Power App, which we already are in a Microsoft district, and the dashboard that you saw, the data feeds directly into that. So they're not entering. So once they enter that data, it's going right into the visualizations. It's not something that they have to go back in and make spreadsheets about or anything like that. It's sort of already set up for them. But then, they're able to, if they have a classroom observation, they're able to take their phone and go into the app and record, look at the indicators and mark those indicators for, a 15-minute observation when they're observing teachers. So we really wanted to make it something that it wasn't an extra thing, but something that was built into their daily routines or weekly routines.
All right. Thank you, Guilford. Our next question is for TNTP and for Guilford. can you share a highlight or an overall takeaway that you have from the last 3 years in the EIC project?
We can start and give Guilford a chance to catch their breath. I would say, besides the primary thing, which would be like talk to your kids and talk to your parents and caregivers to get their perspective. I think that sharing the findings and really like expressly meeting with folks from Buffalo and folks from Pasadena to say, here's what your kids said, here were the things they wanted you to know, here's the concerns that they shared about what they're learning in their math rooms and what's happening day to day. When you were able to pair it with classroom observations, teacher and student survey data was invaluable to them, and allowed them to sort of build in better 360-degree like stakeholder communication systems, as Jency mentioned. And then just like the overall idea of implementation science was invaluable to both Buffalo and Pasadena, and I think has really stuck with them since we've been gone.
Thanks, Ryan. Guilford, how about you?
I think ours is that which is measured is what improves, right? And so because we are measuring curriculum implementation and able to progress monitor that in cycles of support throughout the year, even when we start over every year, it feels like because of teacher turnover, our leadership is prepared to know what that should look like and is actively measuring that. So leadership at all levels are able to respond to the curriculum data and the implementation data that we have. And it's more about test scores. It's not just student outcome at the end of the year, but also implementation throughout.
Thanks, Emily. Jimmy, anything to add there? Or we can move on to the next question? All right. Our next question is, if there is one thing that a district or TA provider could do to improve their implementation in the next 6 months, what is something they could apply based on your learnings and findings? And that is a question for all of our presenters, including our NERN presenters. So if there is one thing that a district or TA provider could do to improve their implementation in the next 6 months, what is something they could apply based on your learnings and findings?
I would say create a district implementation team. So I think one of the things that we've done beyond just this grant, or like Emily showed in the slide where we have now math and literacy K-12, is that there are district implementation teams for a number of different strategic initiatives, focus areas in the district, math, literacy, other subject areas as well. And getting getting leadership on board, getting those different perspectives, and making sure what you're focused on stays focused on, because we meet every month, right? That is really important. It's easy to start things and then say, okay, we'll check back in a year and see how things have gone. But the implementation work is really something that you have to keep on and continue to do throughout the year.
Along those same lines, this is Jency from TNTP. I'd add having a plan goes a long way in ensuring that your strategy stays dynamic. It's not a document that lives on your, internal system. It is actually something that folks have pulled up and regularly consult at those critical progress monitoring periods and really ensures that everyone is clear on their role in supporting effective implementation. And so that is a practice that we continue to use at TNTP across our clients beyond Pasadena and Buffalo. And it is really important in terms of telling the story of implementation over time as well, to understand what to prioritize and scale across your years of implementation.
I can
Oh,
quickly add to that as well. Yolanda from NERN just wanted to lift up the importance of having a shared vision so that everyone is on the same page about what the goals are that are listed in that implementation plan. That is the focus of that implementation team that we've just heard about. And then using data to ensure that that is how decisions are made. And that data is being used to determine what improvements are needed and also highlighting the successes that are happening.
thanks, Yolanda. And I will add to kind of piggyback on what you just said, Yolanda, and what Jimmy just said in terms of the teaming. I think we're 2 years into the project and we continue to get together. I mean, just before the webinar started, we were reminiscing on, oh, we all miss each other, and building that community and that work that we did together, and we continue to share that knowledge through time because there was a lot of data that was collected, and we just share a snippet of what went into this project for 4 years. We had a year of planning and 3 of implementation. So I think that goes a long way. I think it's the support, again, it's at all levels, right? So I think that community that we built within EAC, and those strong partnerships really help us with a carry on of that implementation plan, Jancy, that you mentioned, and to ensure that it wasn't just, bullet points on a piece of paper, but that we were carrying on the work and finding the support that we needed to implement the strategies that we needed along the way to, really have an impact on our student outcomes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So we do have 2 more questions left. Our next question is, how did you transition new leadership into the project and keep things moving without a pause in the work? And that is a question for both Guilford and TNTP. So again, how did you transition new leadership into the project and keep things moving without a pause in the work?
I'll take this one first because we went through 3 directors of math during this project. Now, granted, 2 of those were towards the beginning of the project, but still, with that and also with principal changes, the teaming structures that we were just talking about is what's so important because we have a well-established district implementation team now. So when one person leaves, there's someone else there the new role starts coming to those meetings and they are just brought into the community, right? There's enough collective capacity built at the district and school level now that even when we have, unless a whole school team transitions, which is rare, and we go out and provide district support for that, there's enough collective capacity built at both levels because of that teaming structures that folks were just talking about.
Hi, Amy from TNTP. I can speak to that a little bit in terms of what happened in Buffalo. Because of how large the district was, we knew that there would be like that turnover piece that we need to worry about. And so there was 2 pieces to it. The way that they approached it was a phased approach where they chose 10 schools to start with and then added another 10 schools. So you had these 10 schools doing year 2 while these 10 schools were now doing year 1. So it was like a phased scaling process. And that allowed movement within schools, but it also allowed when there was turnover that there were at least like a good number of leaders that were familiar with the work. And so like Emily said, when new leaders did come in, they kind of were able to just join where everybody else was.
I'll add quickly too that the structures built around this with the indicators for what we're looking for when we're looking at curriculum implementation has helped our onboarding process. We didn't have an onboarding process for new leaders. And because we now have these systems and structures in place, it has created a quick, like we can do a half-day onboarding for new building leaders that like gives them a kickoff of how we do this work in math implementation, and then they just become a part of it. So it's created an onboarding process for leaders as well.
Thank you. All right, so we have time for one more question. And that question is, how, if at all, did your chosen curriculum affect your implementation process, i.e., in terms of strategy, approach, data collection, etc.? So, how, if at all, did your chosen curriculum affect your implementation process? And if nothing's coming straight to mind, maybe some of our Nernians can weigh in on what they've seen as far as how selected curriculum may or may not affect implementation.
I think I can offer kind of an answer to this question. And it connects back to the previous comment from Emily about the importance of like continuous improvement and cycling through. And Ami spoke about having a phased approach. And so, irrespective of the curriculum, we understand that it is complicated work to implement effectively. And so, really being mindful of unpacking those materials systematically, making sure that we are talking about components throughout making sure it's embedded in our PD. And so, teachers, leaders, coaches are all exposed to similar content. That really is where we were focused on, and we find that to be true of whatever curriculum we're working with. So in Pasadena, we were using iReady, and I believe, what were you all using, Eureka? And so we had similar approaches, not identical because the resources are different, but what was really critical was being mindful that you need multiple exposures, multiple opportunities to really understand how to wield those materials effectively.
Jency, the one thing I would add to that or emphasize about what you said is really the idea that like it wasn't just teachers that we were focused on. It was teachers and leaders coming together and engaging in the curriculum that was embedded in the PD together. So everything was through the lens of the curriculum, but the learning that they were understanding about implementation was done together. And that made a big difference, especially in that fluidity of like when you do have leader turnover, at least you have a large contingent, even at a school site, that is familiar with the work and what needs to be done.
All right. Well, thank you. I believe that is all we have time for in terms of Q&A, as we are at the top of the hour here. We're going to go ahead and wrap up first by thanking all of our presenters for joining us today. Thank you so much for for sharing your learnings, for your time in the EIC, and thank you to all presenters, and thank you for joining us today to hear about these final recommendations and reflections on the EIC project. You'll see that a few resources have been dropped in the chat for you. We encourage you to keep an eye out for these additional resources, articles, and materials about the EIC project that will be coming out throughout the next year. And we also encourage you, if you haven't already, to sign up for the NERN newsletter to receive updates straight to your inbox. So thank you again so much for joining us today on behalf of the entire NERN team and the EIC project. We appreciate you, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day and a wonderful holiday season. Thank you so much.